The telephone rang at 6 p.m., a time usually reserved for the quiet settling of the day. But the voice on the other end wasn't quiet. It was frantic, laced with a terrifying kind of excitement. "Mom, I'm getting married tomorrow. I've withdrawn everything from your accounts and sold the house. Bye." The line clicked dead. In that hollow silence, I didn't scream. I didn't collapse. I simply laughed, a dry, jagged sound that echoed through the hallways of a home my son thought he had just stolen. He had no idea that the house he sold was merely a shadow of the life I had actually built. My name is Margaret Thornton. At 62, I am a woman composed of memories and meticulous habits. For 37 years, I built my life brick by brick, working part-time at the local library and living in a modest two-bedroom house in suburban Ohio. My husband passed away when our son, Derek, was only 12. From that moment, my life became a series of sacrifices. I worked 2 jobs, wore the same coat for a decade, and skipped countless meals just to ensure Derek never felt the sting of poverty. I raised him to be ambitious, but I failed to see when that ambition curdled into something dark and predatory. Derek is 34 now, a man who moves through the world with a sharp, restless energy. The first tremor of the coming earthquake appeared 3 months ago. Derek called me, his voice smooth as honey, a tone he usually reserved for when he wanted a favor. "Mom, you're getting older," he said, the concern sounding almost genuine. "I want to help you set up automatic bill payments. I don't want you to miss anything important or lose your electricity because of a forgotten piece of paper." I hesitated. A small, instinctive part of me bristled at the intrusion. But he was my son, my only child, the boy I had rocked to sleep during thunderstorms. I gave him the numbers, believing that a son's love was the ultimate security. 6 weeks later, the second sign arrived in the form of Brittany, his 26-year-old fiancée. She was beautiful in a way that felt calculated, every hair in place, every smile ending just before it reached her eyes. They sat in my living room, and I watched as Brittany's gaze didn't land on me, but on the vintage clock on the mantel, the original hardwood floors, and the expansive backyard. "Real estate in this area has appreciated significantly, Margaret," she remarked, bypassing Mom or Mrs. Thornton entirely. "This house must be worth a fortune now." I sipped my tea, feeling a cold draft in the room that had nothing to do with the weather. "It's my home," I replied simply. "I'm not interested in its value." Derek just laughed, squeezing Brittany's hand. But the look they shared was one of silent agreement, a language I didn't yet speak. The final realization hit on a Sunday morning in late October. I was sitting in my kitchen, the steam from my coffee rising in the pale light, as I logged into my banking portal for my weekly check. My heart didn't just skip a beat, it seemed to stop entirely. My savings account, the one that held $127,000, the sum of my husband's life insurance, decades of disciplined saving, and every penny I had denied myself for a rainy day showed a balance of $1,200. My checking account was a ghost town, holding a mere $53. My hands shook so violently I nearly dropped my phone as I called the bank. A representative named Ashley confirmed my worst nightmare. The withdrawals were authorized through my online portal and transferred to an account belonging to Derek Thornton. I hung up without a word. I sat in that kitchen for 3 hours, staring at the floral wallpaper I had hung myself 20 years ago. The betrayal wasn't just about the money, it was the surgical precision with which he had gutted my future. He hadn't just taken my cash, he had attempted to erase the safety net I had spent a lifetime weaving. But as the shock began to recede, a cold, hard clarity took its place. Derek thought he knew everything about me, but he had forgotten one thing. I am a woman who spent decades working in legal offices before I ever touched a library book. I knew the law, and more importantly, I knew where I had hidden the real foundations of my life. The morning after I discovered my empty bank accounts, the phone rang again. It was Derek. I considered letting it go to voicemail, but I needed to hear the sound of his betrayal one more time, to etch it into my memory so I would never grow weak again. "Hey, Mom?" he chirped, his voice vibrating with a sickening cheerfulness. "Great news. Brittany and I decided not to wait. We're having a beautiful ceremony at the Riverside Country Club tomorrow. It's going to be perfect." My throat felt like it was lined with glass. Derek, my bank accounts, they're empty. He actually laughed, a short, dismissive sound that made my blood run cold. Oh, that, yeah, Mom, I withdrew the money. I needed it for the wedding and for our new start in the city. Don't worry, you'll be fine with your Social Security checks. It's time you started living a more minimal life anyway. The arrogance in his voice was a physical blow. But he wasn't finished. And here's the other thing. I sold the house. I used that power of attorney from the documents you signed last year. The closing was yesterday. I got a great price, $340,000. That's going toward our down payment on a luxury condo. You have 30 days to pack your things and move out. The world tilted on its axis. You sold my home? You're making me homeless for a down payment? Look, Mom, the caterer is calling. We'll talk after the honeymoon. Bye. The line went dead. I sat there, the phone heavy in my hand, feeling the weight of 37 years of motherhood crumbling around me. He had robbed me, sold the roof over my head, and invited me to a wedding paid for with my own blood and sweat, all while effectively discarding me like an old piece of furniture. But then, as I stared at the walls of my living room, the crushing weight began to shift. I looked at the crown molding, the specific placement of the fireplace, and the view of the oak tree in the front yard. A slow, chilling realization washed over me. I started to chuckle, a small sound that grew into a full, hysterical laugh until tears streaked my face. Derek, in his frantic greed and his desperate need to impress Brittany, had made a monumental, life-altering mistake. The house he thought he had sold, the one listed in my personal name for simple tax purposes, was a small rental property I had purchased 15 years ago on Oak Street. It was currently occupied by the Hendersons, a lovely family with a rock-solid lease agreement that didn't expire for another 18 months. Derek had never bothered to check the address on the deed he had fraudulently used. He had grown up in this house, the one I was sitting in now, and in his mind, Mom's house was just an asset to be liquidated. He didn't know that my actual home, the one worth nearly $600,000 and completely mortgage-free, was held in a complex trust under my late husband's mother's estate name. I was the trustee and the sole beneficiary, but my name didn't appear on the primary residential deed. Derek had spent his whole life under this roof, without ever understanding the legal fortress I had built to protect it. He had sold a property he didn't have the right to vacate, to buyers who were about to inherit a legal nightmare of sitting tenants, based on a power of attorney that was a complete fabrication. My foolish, greedy son hadn't just stolen from me. He had set a trap for himself and walked right into it, dragging his calculating bride along with him. The laughter faded, replaced by a cold, surgical determination. I wasn't just a mother anymore. I was a woman who had been robbed, and it was time for Derek to learn that the confused old woman he mocked was the most dangerous enemy he would ever face. The laughter died down, leaving behind a silence so absolute it felt heavy. I didn't waste another minute grieving the son I thought I had. That son was a ghost. The man who just hung up on me was a criminal, and I needed to treat him as such. I stood up, my joints feeling stiff but my mind sharper than it had been in years, and went straight to my mahogany filing cabinet. This was my armory. I pulled out the folder labeled Rental Property, Oak Street. Inside were the original deeds, the property tax receipts, and most importantly, the ironclad lease agreement signed by the Hendersons. Derek had sold this property for $340,000, likely promising the buyers immediate possession. He had no idea he had just sold them a legal battle. By law, the Hendersons could not be evicted simply because the house changed hands. Derek had effectively sold a lie, and the title company would be the first to smell the smoke. But the most disturbing puzzle remained: the power of attorney. Derek claimed I had signed it last year. I searched my memory, digging through the fog of the previous autumn. Then, it hit me like a physical blow. Last November, I had been hospitalized for 4 days with a brutal case of pneumonia. My fever had spiked to 104 degrees. I was delirious, drifting in and out of consciousness under a haze of heavy antibiotics. I remembered Derek sitting by my bed, his face pale, holding a stack of papers. "Just some insurance forms for the hospital, Mom," he had whispered, his hand steadying mine as he placed a pen in my trembling fingers. "Don't worry about it. Just sign here so they don't stop your treatment." The betrayal was so calculated, it made me nauseous. He hadn't waited for me to grow old or senile. He had used my near-death experience to forge his way into my life's work. I picked up the phone and called Martin Green. Martin had been a friend for decades, a man who attended my book club but whose real talent lay in the courtroom. When I finished explaining the situation, there was a long, heavy pause on the other end of the line. "Margaret," Martin said, his voice dropping into a professional, low register. "This isn't just a family dispute. This is grand theft, forgery, and real estate fraud. If we move forward, Derek won't just lose the money. He could go to prison for a long time. Are you prepared for that?" "He didn't hesitate when he chose to make me homeless, Martin," I replied, my voice as cold as a winter morning. "I won't hesitate to give him the justice he earned." That afternoon, I met my neighbor Patricia. She was a retired paralegal with a mind like a steel trap. Over tea, I told her everything. Her face transformed from shock to a fierce, protective rage. "That boy always had a streak of entitlement," she hissed. "But this is monstrous. What do you need, Maggie?" "I need eyes," I told her. "I need to know what's happening at the Oak Street house, and I need to contact the Hendersons. They need to know they aren't going anywhere, and their new landlord is a fraud." By the time the sun began to set, I had already initiated a fraud alert with my bank's corporate office. The young woman I spoke with, Ashley, sounded horrified as she flagged the accounts. "Because the amounts are so large and the power of attorney is being questioned, we are opening a criminal investigation immediately, Mrs. Thornton," she informed me. That night, my phone buzzed with a text from Derek. "Mom, the bank just called me asking about unauthorized activity." "What did you tell them?" "Just call them back and say it was a mistake. I'm in the middle of my rehearsal dinner and Brittany is stressed. Don't ruin this for us." I didn't reply. I stared at the screen until it went dark. He was worried about his rehearsal dinner. He was worried about Brittany's stress. He wasn't worried about the mother he had robbed. He still thought I was the same soft woman who would do anything to keep him happy. He was wrong. I wasn't his mother tonight. I was the plaintiff. The Riverside Country Club was a monument to excess, draped in thousands of white roses and lit by crystal chandeliers that threw a cold, fractured light over the guests. It was a $50,000 wedding, my $50,000. I arrived early, dressed in a navy blue suit that was elegant but understated, the kind of outfit a proud mother wears when she wants to fade into the background. But I wasn't there to fade. I was there to witness the height of their delusion before the fall. Brittany was a vision in silk and lace, a designer gown that likely cost more than my first car. When she saw me, her smile didn't waver, but her eyes scanned me like a predator checking for a hidden weapon. "Margaret, so glad you could make it," she purred, leaning in for a kiss that never touched my cheek. "I hope you're not still brooding over that house business. It's a fresh start for everyone, really. You'll love the assisted living facility we looked at for you." I smiled back, a calm, practiced expression. "I'm sure you've thought of everything, Brittany." Derek approached us then, looking sharp in his tuxedo, though there was a slight tremor in his hands. He leaned in and whispered, "Did you call the bank? Tell me you fixed that fraud investigation." "I took care of it, Derek," I said, which was the truth, just not in the way he hoped. "Enjoy your day. You've certainly worked hard for it." The ceremony was a hollow display of devotion. I sat in the front row, watching my son promise to cherish a woman who had helped him gut his mother's life. Every "I do" felt like a needle under my skin. During the reception, the champagne flowed freely, bought with the money that was supposed to fund my hip surgery or my quiet years of retirement. I moved through the crowd like a ghost, listening to the guests praise Derek's success and his generosity. Just as the catering staff began to roll out the 5-tier wedding cake, my phone vibrated in my clutch. A text from Martin Green. "Police report filed. Title company has been notified of the fraud. They are freezing the escrow funds from the Oak Street sale immediately. The buyer's attorney is already calling Derek's cell. The trap is shut." I looked up to see Derek laughing with his groomsmen, his phone tucked away in his jacket. He hadn't seen the messages yet. He was at the summit of his stolen mountain, unaware that the ground was already liquefying beneath him. I walked over to him, a glass of sparkling cider in my hand. "A toast, Derek," I said, my voice cutting through the noise of the music. He turned, grinning, holding up his glass. "To the truth," I said softly. "It always has a way of coming out, doesn't it?" He blinked, his grin faltering for just a fraction of a second. "Sure, Mom. To the truth." I watched him take a deep drink of the expensive champagne. At that exact moment, his phone began to buzz incessantly in his pocket. Then Brittany's phone, sitting on the head table, lit up with a call from an unknown number, likely the title company, or the furious buyers who had just discovered they had purchased a house occupied by protected tenants. I didn't stay to see the color drain from his face. I didn't stay to hear Brittany's first scream of rage. I walked out of the ballroom, through the rose-scented foyer, and into the cool night air. As I drove away from the country club, I could see the blue and red lights of a patrol car heading in that direction, not for a noise complaint, but for the beginning of a criminal investigation. The wedding was over. The reckoning had begun. The confrontation I knew was coming arrived 3 days after the wedding. I was in my garden, pruning the roses, when a black luxury SUV screeched into my driveway. The doors flew open before the engine had even fully cut out. Derek stumbled out, his tuxedo replaced by rumpled clothes, his face a mask of frantic rage. Brittany followed, her designer heels clicking sharply against the pavement, her expression one of icy, calculated fury. "What the hell did you do?" Derek screamed, slamming the car door so hard the glass rattled. He marched into my living room without waiting for an invitation, pushing past me. The title company froze every cent from the house sale. They're talking about irregularities. The bank has locked my accounts. Even the money I moved is gone. They're saying the power of attorney was forged, Mom. They're threatening to arrest me. I closed the front door slowly, turned around, and leaned against it. I felt a strange, cold peace. Perhaps they are saying it was forged, Derek, because it was. You brought papers to my hospital bed when I was delirious with a 104-degree fever. You told me they were insurance forms. You didn't just steal my money. You stole my signature while I was fighting for my breath. Brittany stepped forward, her voice like a whip. "This is ridiculous. Derek was doing you a favor, Margaret. You're old. You're clearly becoming incompetent. You can't manage your own finances or your property anymore. We were just moving things around to ensure your care." "My care?" I looked her dead in the eye. "Is that why you spent $10,000 of my savings on a wedding dress? Is that why you sold a rental property that provides my monthly income? It's not stealing if you're too senile to know the difference." Brittany's mask finally shattered, revealing the hollow opportunist beneath. She turned to Derek. Tell her you're her son, and you have a right to that money. It's all going to be yours eventually anyway. We just took an advance." Derek stepped closer, looming over me, trying to use his height to intimidate me just as he had when he was a rebellious teenager. "Mom, stop being difficult. I'm trying to be nice here. Call the bank. Call the title company. Tell them you made a mistake. Tell them you authorized everything and you just got confused. If you don't," he leaned in, his voice dropping to a low, guttural threat, "we'll make your life hell. We have lawyers too. We'll file for guardianship. We'll tell the court you have dementia. We'll have you declared incompetent and move you into the cheapest, state-run nursing home we can find. You'll spend the rest of your days staring at a gray wall, wondering why you didn't just play along." I felt a shiver of genuine fear, not of his threats because I had the evidence, but of the monster I had raised. This man wasn't my son. He was a stranger wearing my son's face, a predator who saw his own mother as nothing more than an ATM with a pulse. "Is that a threat, Derek?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "It's a promise," he hissed. "Call them, now." I looked at him, really looked at him, and felt the last tether of maternal instinct snap. "Get out of my house," I said. My voice wasn't loud, but it had the weight of a gavel hitting a bench. "Mom." "Get out!" I roared, the force of it surprising even me. "Both of you. You have 5 seconds before I press the silent alarm that connects directly to the police station. You want to talk about lawyers? Talk to mine. You want to talk about dementia? Try explaining your notary, who was in another state on the day I was in the hospital. Now, leave before I have you forcibly removed from this property." Brittany spat a curse at me, her face contorted with hate. Derek looked at me with a mixture of shock and pure, unadulterated rage. "You've destroyed everything," he muttered as he backed toward the door. "You've ruined my life over some numbers in a bank." "No, Derek," I said as they crossed the threshold. "You destroyed your life the moment you decided your mother was a victim instead of a person." I slammed the door and locked it. My hands were shaking so hard I had to sit on the floor, but as I watched their SUV peel away, I picked up the phone. I didn't call the bank. I called Martin Green. "File the police report, Martin. Press full charges. I want them prosecuted to the absolute limit of the law." The courthouse was a cold, cavernous building that smelled of floor wax and old paper. I arrived wearing a charcoal gray suit, my silver hair pinned back, looking every bit the sweet grandmother Derek thought he could manipulate. But beneath the fabric, my heart was a stone. 6 weeks of discovery had unburied even more filth. Derek hadn't just forged the power of attorney. He had paid a corrupt notary $2,000 to backdate the seal. The trial was a grueling display of human ugliness. Derek sat across the aisle, flanked by a high-priced defense attorney named Richard Chen. Brittany sat behind him, no longer the glowing bride, but a woman whose designer clothes seemed to be losing their luster. Every time Derek's eyes met mine, he didn't look for forgiveness. He looked for a weakness he could exploit. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," Chen began, his voice smooth and paternal. "This is a tragic case of family misunderstanding. Margaret Thornton is a woman struggling with the isolation of aging. She gave her son access to her life, and now, suffering from a documented history of health issues and confusion, she has turned a gift into a crime. This isn't fraud, it's a mother's regret." I sat through hours of their lies. They brought up my hospital records, trying to use my pneumonia-induced delirium as proof that I was permanently unstable. They called my loneliness a motive for vengeance. But then, the prosecution took the floor. Andrea Walsh, the prosecutor, was a woman who dealt in facts, not feelings. She called the bank representative. She called the title company agent. And then, she called the notary. The man had crumbled under the threat of losing his own freedom. He admitted on the stand, under oath, that Derek had approached him with a stack of papers and a bribe. He testified that he had never even seen me sign the documents. Then, it was my turn. I walked to the witness stand, placed my hand on the Bible, and looked directly at the jury. "Mrs. Thornton," Andrea asked, "did you ever intend for your son to have total control over your assets?" "No," I said, my voice steady and clear. "I spent 37 years ensuring my son had a future. I did not spend them ensuring I wouldn't have one. My son didn't take my money to care for me. He took it to buy a life he hadn't earned, while leaving me with nothing but a 30-day eviction notice." Chen's cross-examination was brutal. He tried to rattle me, shouting about my spite and my hatred for Brittany. He asked if I was certain I hadn't just forgotten signing the papers. I looked at him, then at Derek, and said, "A mother might forget many things, Mr. Chen, but she never forgets the moment she realizes her child has stopped seeing her as a human being and started seeing her as a hurdle." The final blow came when the prosecution played a recording from my home security system, a detail Derek had forgotten in his arrogance. It captured the audio of their visit to my house 3 days after the wedding. Derek's voice rang through the courtroom. "We'll tell the court you have dementia, move you into the cheapest state-run nursing home. You'll spend the rest of your days staring at a gray wall." The silence that followed that recording was deafening. Derek's face turned a ghostly shade of gray. Brittany burst into tears, covering her face with her hands. Even their lawyer looked down at his notes, unable to find a defense for such naked cruelty. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours. When the 4 persons stood up, the air in the room felt thin. On the count of grand theft, guilty. On the count of forgery, guilty. On the count of real estate fraud, guilty. I didn't cheer. I didn't cry. I felt a strange, hollow sensation in my chest. I had won, but the prize was the wreckage of my family. The judge, a woman who looked like she had seen too many children betray their parents, looked at Derek with pure disdain. "Mr. Thornton, you have committed a crime of profound entitlement. You didn't just steal money. You attempted to steal a woman's dignity." She sentenced him to 7 years in a state penitentiary. As the bailiff stepped forward to handcuff him, Derek finally looked at me. For a split second, I saw the little boy who used to bring me dandelions from the yard. Then, the mask of the predator returned, and he was led away in chains.